Hello again. Another dev chat with Jono and Alexis, and a lot of stuff to share today. Um, Actually, maybe a good place to start would be some updates from yesterday, uh, which I haven't shown anybody yet. I kind of felt like it was going slowly, but then when I was done, I was like, oh, I actually got quite a lot done. So that's often the way, isn't it? You just kind of keep slowly battling away.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so in Fastlight, um, tell me if you guys like, I don't know if this is obvious and easy or not, but basically I added this .data class thing. And so what that does is it creates a type. That type is a data class. You can make stuff. That
Nice.
so the reason why is like I, for a few reasons. One is like for kind of type completion, at least in Jupyter, it's nice to be able to like see what I'm meant to be typing in, you know, and it's nice, for Python to know about what types are expected and stuff like that. Particularly, as we'll see later, for it's necessary for the web application framework stuff I was building, as you'll see. So basically, yeah, given that this is something that you pass keyword arguments into, and the keyword arguments are the same as the, obviously the field names. And you'll see all of them are defined as the database type or none.
Mm-hmm.
Things like SQL model, Sebastian's thing, are much more careful about actually knowing if it's nullable or not. And like if it's not nullable, it doesn't say so, blah, blah, blah. I very intentionally don't do that because this int, actually, you don't have to pass it when you create it. It's created by the database for you.
Mm.
Um, and so in SQL model, you have to have different types for like the update version and the create version. And in this case, just like, you know what, I'm not going to be strict about this, you know. Um, so anyway, that way, I've got a dictionary here for AC/DC albums. There are a lot more. I don't know why they only have two in this database. It's a bit of a disappointment, but at least they're good ones. So you can pass those in for a particular AC/DC album as keyword arguments, and you get back an object. Um, okay, so that's basically how you can convert the result of a call to your model. We're querying something in the model. Now you've got back an object.
Could I ask,
Um,
interrupt with a basic question here?
Anytime.
So, when you define the variable album underscore DC, is
Yes.
that album underscore DC completely equivalent to what I would get if I declared a data class in the usual way by saying at
Indeed.
data class and then said class data?
I've
Okay.
even written a function called data class source that takes a data
Mm-hmm.
class and returns the source code to recreate the same data class.
Okay, so it is.
Yes,
Um,
it is. And
so in that
so, and
case,
there's no magic here.
mhm,
There's actually the data classes thing in the standard library has something called make data class in it.
okay. Um, in that case, would you say it's like more idiomatic if album DC was capitalized because it's a class definition and constructor, or
Yeah,
not
maybe.
really? Or
Yeah,
okay,
maybe. I'm not really going to use it for much, as you'll see, so don't worry too much about
okay.
that.
Just wanted
Anyway, yeah,
to
so I
double
added
check
this.
my understanding.
Yeah, yeah, it's good. Yeah, so I couldn't find something that spits out the source code for a data class. So uh, I just wrote a little one. It doesn't do everything, but it does enough to cover what this particular one does at least. So this would let you recreate that. Um, so the reason that's potentially interesting is then that I added this create module thing, which literally just opens a file, prints from data class, its import data class, and then prints the source code to it. And so that means that you could now, as you see here, create a module. And so create mod is actually going to do every single table. And if you want to, also every single view. It's going to print out the data class source for all of them. So here, if I go create mod db, then this will create a file that contains all of them. Now, in Jupyter, that's entirely useless. But if you use VS Code, it's very useful because you can now do that, right? Or import star or whatever. And I've now got, even in VS Code, you now have autocomplete.
So this is
So
like the other way around to something like SQL model
yes,
where you
exactly.
define the data classes and then it builds the database from that. This is like, oh, you have
Yes.
the database, we'll
Yeah.
build the data classes from that.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I don't love CodeGen, but in the end, if you want VS Code support, you have to do one of them. And the reason
Mhm.
I prefer this one, for me, is that this way I can create my database schema using a GUI or using SQLite utils or using SQL statements or using a migration system or whatever. It doesn't matter. And that at any
Mhm.
point I could just reflect that into my module with a single line of code. So I think that's good. Okay.
The $5 word for that benefit would just be to say composability, right? Because by just being able to consume the SQL model as it comes in, you can use anything you wanted to create it.
My brain's not working well enough to quite see why that's composability, but I will take your word for it.
Well, it is in the sense that what you've created now composes with any of a variety of tools that someone else could have made for defining the SQL
Okay,
schema to
I
begin
guess
with.
I can
Yeah.
see that. Now, we already had this thing where you could, I think, or is this new? Did we already have this thing where I had dunder call, and dunder call is basically the same as doing a select where order by limit offset. But the thing that's now been added is that when you call dot data class, it optionally and by default also stores the data class inside the table object. And if that's happened, then whenever you call dunder call, it automatically casts it. So now you can see when I call album limit equals 2, I get the things I get back are not dictionaries anymore. They're actually
Hmm.
data classes. Um,
So so this is like this slightly opaque that, oh, if you happen to have made a data class from this at any time in the past, you now have different behavior when you call it.
yep, exactly.
Okay.
And it's not meant to be opaque. It's actually
Mm,
like another way to think of it would be like, oh, ignore the thing that's returned from this. And in fact,
right.
probably what you'd want to do most of the time is, I'm not sure I documented this, so let's do this now. Oh, here we go. It's at the end. If you want it for all tables, just call all DCs, right? And probably like you would actually like just not
Mm,
bother with the return type. This is
right.
just like this is how you turn it on, is you
Mm,
just run that. So you probably always just run that. And so that applies then not just to dunder call, also applies to .get, which gets by primary key. So those are the two things that let you get data classes. So then I've also added a lot of additional behavior particularly to update, insert, and upsert. So if you haven't come across upsert, it's not a SQL keyword. It's a concept, which is that a lot of databases, including SQLite, and originally I think it came from Postgres, have some kind of thing that lets you insert things, and if the thing is already there, then update the existing thing, where already there is referring to the primary key. So let's create a new table called cats. So one of the nice things about SQLite utils is the fact that cats is not there doesn't matter, right? Okay, we've still got a table cats. It just doesn't exist, right?
Yeah. This took me a second or two to wrap my head around. Like, okay,
Yeah.
well, I can check if it's there or not by seeing if cat is in dt dot or is in dt. But
Well,
um,
I've just added that feature, yes. So I can say cats in DB. Oh, is it DT? Yeah. So I added this. I added a dunder contains support to this
oh,
yesterday,
nice. Oh, well, I
and
was surprised it worked and I was very happy. And I didn't realize
and
it
I
was only because you just
yes, and I
added
think you can also
it.
do it on the table itself. Yep. Okay. So then I can create it, and then I can look at the schema. I added this thing. I think I've added it to FastCore highlight. It's really badly named. Well, that's right. Highlight as a markdown output. This is actually markdown output. You can say what language. This is just a minor convenience. So you can see the schema that this is done. And so if I now rerun cats in DT, it's now true, or the stringified version now true. Okay. So we've created a cats table. So when where did I say the same applies to?
That it's automatically casting to the data class,
Yes.
or that it takes keyword arguments.
Right. Okay. Okay. Maybe we should just mention this curious feature about SQLite utils. Okay. So then something else I added is now when you insert or upsert, you get back the inserted row. Now we haven't called .data class yet. I mean, we called it earlier, but that was before we all DCs. We haven't, but the cats didn't exist yet at that point. So therefore, we got back the dictionary. So here's an example of using upsert. But yeah, so now if we do the data class thing, then let's just show you, there's no point storing that. It's just enabling it. So now if I go cat equals cats.get1, so now I can set my attributes because this is a data class, and I can pass that in because the first thing to be passed in is okay, that type annotation is now wrong. Let's fix that, shall we? Vim fastlight slash keyword arguments def, there it is, def upsert. Okay, so that's a dictionary, a string to any, or a data class, which isn't of any particular type. So I think you just have to call it any. Cool. So you can see like there wasn't much code for me to write to add this behavior. So this is actually something quite nice I added to FastCore yesterday. When you patch something, so in this case, I'm patching table. If there's something already exists, it stores the original version of that function now as underscore orig underscore with that function name. So this is a really nice way for me to now patch new behavior. So it's just calling the original version, but it's you know,
Hmm.
doing the data class thing, and at the end
As
it
long as you
tries
don't
to
patch twice.
get. No, it's fine to patch twice. It checks if there's already an orig upsert there, so you can
Nice.
patch
So
like crazy.
is the default behavior when you do the second patch to clobber, but you have access to the old patch, or is the default behavior to advise, meaning that it executes both of them?
So if you repatch, then orig upsert will still be the orig upsert. So it clobbers the old patch.
Okay, so it clobbers the old one, but the old one's there if you want to access it from the new one.
The the grandparent's there, but the old patch is not there. If you repatch the patched method, then the original patched method is
Oh,
still
okay, I
activated.
see. Okay, got it.
Okay, so cool. We can drop the table. So that yeah, that was basically stuff that I added as I started to implement the next thing I'll show you. So
Nice.
um, all right, so this is where things get fun, is we have a to-do list application. This to-do list application is like, it's got nice kind of resizing behavior. It all feels very modern. When I click on things, there's no full screen refresh. I can add new to-dos, show people fast HTML. Keyboard support add, it just appears. Click on that, change it, enter. And it's kind of like it feels like a very like you can click on anything at any time, and I haven't found a way to break it. Do you know what I mean? And it's, as you can see, it's fast, and obviously I haven't spent much time styling this. I haven't spent any time styling this, but it's like looks and feels like a reasonably modern kind of web application. Um, the entire thing is written in 69 lines of code, many of which are blank. Um, and it's all Python, and there's no templates, there's no JavaScript, and there's no CSS. It's literally a single file of Python. So this is thanks to a thing I want to show you guys, which I know both of you have seen bits of, called FastHTML. And the goal of FastHTML and this kind of ecosystem is to allow people to create single file web applications without the shortcomings of like Gradio and Streamlit and stuff, which are really great systems, but by the shortcomings of those is like they're they're for like creating dashboards and proof of concepts and whatever. If you like, you wouldn't create your whole startup as a Gradio app, probably, for a Streamlit app. And like when people get to the bit where it's like, okay, I now want to have a different component that works in this different way and takes advantage of this JavaScript library, it's like, oh, okay, that's possible. Now you have to learn this entire new massive complicated framework that's harder than it would have been to just use it in the first place. So the idea of this is to let you like start building something as easily as Streamlit or Gradio would, but naturally support growth from there. There's no point where it's like, okay, you're done. Now you're going to have to use TypeScript, or now you're done. You're going to have to learn to create your own IPy widget plumbing, or like Solara, like FastUI. And it's actually loosely based on the framework I created, Jesus, 25 years ago for FastMail, which supported one of the busiest sites on the internet. It's this approach scales out in any way you like. So that's the goal. It's basically reuse your Python knowledge. You can use any CSS framework. You can use any JavaScript library. You can use web components. You can use, all that stuff. And if you create something with, your Python that you think other people might like, you can stick it up on PyPy and other people can pip install your style sheet framework or your web component library or whatever. So, and ditto for other people's. So the particular one that at the moment I think it'll probably ship with is for CSS is called Pico. Super simple, lightweight thing that I'm pretty sure quite soon we'll have like a Daisy UI, pip install, FastHTML Daisy UI, whatever. Or like if there are certain JavaScript things you like, you can easily wrap them with this and pip install those. There's no build step, there's no code gen, So in fact, let's take a log. So if I change this here to to-do list demo, and I'll pop up the terminal. You can see this running in the background here, right? And as soon as I hit save, it's refreshed itself. And back over here, there it is, right? Because there's no build step or anything to do. It just keeps going. So, all right. So let me show you how the app is built. And
Can I interrupt with, again, one or two quick
anytime,
questions?
anytime. You don't need permission
So,
to interrupt. You can
all
just.
right, then
Yeah.
I'll interrupt a little more liberally. So I'm aware of what Gradio does, and I think I've like used it once or twice, but I haven't never explored it in detail enough to have an understanding of, why it might not be the kind of thing that scales up from a quick start to like a full application.
Sure.
Um, so I was
So
wondering, hard to summarize, but if you like could give a sense of what is it about the way it works that or Streamlit works that you feel like makes it doesn't give you that sort of continuous path from quick start to a bigger, more complicated thing.
yeah, absolutely. Um, that's not how it works. Sorry.
So while you're finding that, Alexis, Gradio is very oriented around getting some inputs to a function and then displaying back the outputs. Like it's ideal for I have a model that makes predictions or I have something that generates something. You can do some state tracking and things like that, but it's very, very nice for like this kind of interface here is so easy in Gradio.
Mm-hmm.
But trying to move to something where, I don't know, you're storing stuff in the user's cookies, or you're doing state, or you're keeping track of multiple things, or you want multiple pages in your app, um, it does get very cumbersome very quickly.
Yeah, so
Is that
here's an
because it,
example, right?
all
I
right.
mean, let's have a look at an example. So here's an example of something that, has an upload button, or you can click an example and you can click submit and it runs a machine learning model on it. It's indeed a doggy. This is a classic kind of Gradio interface.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at how it's implemented, um, you create an image, you create a label,
Mm-hmm.
and then you create an interface that will call this
Mm.
function. These are your inputs. This is the output. and these are examples. It's a very specific kind of application it can create, and for that particular kind of application, it creates very quickly and easily. It's not a general, like you couldn't create Instagram in this.
Right.
If you wanted to create Instagram, well, Meta at the time before it was Meta, I guess it originally was created by Instagram. They used Django, right? So Django, as you all know, is a general purpose web framework from which you can build anything that your brain can think of. So FastHTML is like Django, lets you build anything. And
Okay.
Streamlit's similar to Gradio. It's the same kind of idea of like sketch out the basic inputs and outputs and maybe one function to call kind of thing. That's it.
So one thing I think about when I think about this like design space is that it sounds like Streamlit and Gradio give you abstractions that are very convenient to work with, but they don't fundamentally map onto the underlying abstractions of how a website is built, like,
Precisely.
div and HTML and everything. And so
So
you
let's
hit
take a look
that
at this
impedance
example.
mismatch. Okay.
So let's take a look at this example of how, compare it to this. Let's instead see how was this screen created. So this screen has got a header. It's got a thing here with a button and an input. It's got a list of to-dos, and optionally got some details about the to-do underneath. So this one here, and it's on the root of our website. So here is the implementation of that, and it contains, so, and then if you look at the HTML, it contains a main. The main contains an H1. The H1 contains an article. The article contains a header, an unordered list, and a footer. So the thing that you write here is actually the same as the HTML. So, okay, give me a main with an H1. The body is an unordered list containing some to-dos. And above that will be a header containing a form with an input and a button. And we'll give the whole thing a title, which you can see up here. So yeah, in this case, the thing that we're actually working with is HTML. And also we're working with things like posts and IDs. So yeah, we are working with the same elements that anybody building something with React or Django or whatever is. And that's why with this you can build anything, and you can the abstractions that you're building with are not like totally different. They're tiny wrappers over the basic foundations of the internet. Right?
Okay. And those things that look like function applications are creating data structures that are then that you then convert into HTML later.
Yes, which we will see.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So this reminds me of a library called Hiccup that works in a similar way, not a Python library. So I have a second question.
What language is that in?
It's in Clojure, Clojure, and
oh yes, of course.
Yeah.
Right.
And it uses the native data structures of vector and dictionaries to represent tag that to represent an element and its attributes.
Yeah.
So when you want to build a big HTML page, you kind of build it just by essentially doing things that look like nested function calls that are actually just returning the basic data structures, vector and dictionary and a list that mirrors the same thing.
Yep.
And this is very
Yeah.
different to like
So
some libraries will have a, a form object, right? That's a Python object or a Pydantic model or something like
Hmm.
that. And then it also has like on the front end a view, component and some JavaScript and a WebSocket stream to synchronize data between the Python object and the actual front end. And then the view or Svelte or whatever your JavaScript framework is does some magic and eventually produces the HTML form. So
Yeah,
there's a lot of machinery in the middle there, which is
yeah.
sometimes very nice. But yeah, in this case, it's like, oh, you just write the thing that produces that HTML.
Well, one of
Yeah.
the kind of aesthetics that, or design approaches that can work well when it's possible is to try to embrace basic data structures as much as possible rather than introduce like new types, because then the
Mm.
basic data structures are, again, $5 word, composable with generic manipulators that you already have for basic data structures. Like in Python, that would be like comprehensions, right? If you're representing your list in your HTML that will be eventually turned into HTML is just a Python list, then you can go and modify every element in your list just with a comprehension.
so in
And
fact, every one of those HTML functions is returning a 3-element Python list. The
okay.
3-element Python list contains, in order, the name of the tag as a string,
Hmm.
a list of the children, and a dictionary of the attributes. And yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the closure one. I haven't seen that before, but basically almost every functional language has a version of this. So Haskell has one, OCaml has one, um, uh, and there are similar things in Python as well, although they're not quite as functional as FastHTML or those OCaml and Haskell ones are. It looks like the closure one. Um, it's how I wrote FastMail. That was written in Perl, but to me, um, apart from anything else, I don't like switching between files.
Yeah.
So I don't, templates were created back in the day because web design was very difficult because you had to write lots of HTML in order to deal with the quirks of each browser. And a lot of the visual representation was contained in the HTML. That before CSS, all of it was. So because we had web designers, like that was you know, a very specific kind of job, which involved to a large degree knowing about quirks of browsers and stuff. Web designers needed to be able to write HTML and look at the HTML, and they were not generally coders. So we came up with this idea as a community of being like, oh, let's give them templates. And so, the place where the name will go will be like curly bracket name, and the place where the email will be curly bracket email. And they don't have to worry about that. They can design the whole thing, give it back to the coder, and then that's now a template they run. This doesn't seem useful anymore because, we just do semantic HTML anyway. So to me, the idea of having a separate file that contains 2 separate languages. The first separate language is HTML. The second separate language is like Ginger or whatever. I'm not very fond of. So I want to be able to do it all in one file. Um, and yeah, this functional approach, it was actually Austin who, um, and also a guy called Daniel, who's one of the authors of um, one of my favorite books, which is called Two Scoops of Django. They both told me about some of these functional libraries. Okay. Um, so yeah, so I'll show you guys more about this in a moment, but
I got one more question. Sorry. You
yes,
said I had a
no,
license to ask questions. So here's question number
always
two.
do.
You talked about how this design, one of the goals you had in mind was for it to offer a kind of smooth path onto a more full-featured website that kind of you do for a real app.
Yeah.
And part of that is cleaving to the underlying abstractions of the browser so you can work with them rather than like hit the impedance mismatch problem. But
Mhm.
another part of it is using components that other people have made,
Yes.
right? So
Like this
browse.
one, for example, which I made.
Okay. I was going to ask about like calendar pickers and React components and
Yep.
stuff like
Hmm.
So
that.
this one,
Okay.
which I made. So we will see that in a moment. And they are written in Python and distributed as pip installable things. And so, yep, we'll see that. Uh, So let's look more at how to implement this particular form. Okay, so I'm going to assume you know HTML. So you know there's a thing called a form. You know there's a thing called a button. And as you see, we've got like, it's all autocompletes all here. So if I start typing, it's all here, or ID, inert, input mode. So I've got all of the attributes there as auto-completable things, but they're all standard stuff. You'll see I don't return an HTML object with a body, but instead I return a tuple with two things. One is what's going to be inside the body, which, as we saw, is a main. So the body contains a main. The other things that are there have been added by my extensions, so you can ignore those. So this is the thing that goes into the body, and then this is the thing that goes into the head. So you can return an HTML if you want to. Like I could have gone return HTML head body, but you don't have to. And we'll see why this has got some benefits later. But for now, I'll just say like this is both more convenient and as it'll turn out, it's got some benefits. All right, so the child of so when you put in a tag name, you'll see that the first thing is *C. This is where you put children. So you can write as many children as you like. So title, hello, there, whatever you like. Put a link there, right? So that's fine. And then, yeah, any attributes are just attributes to the tag. Class is special. You can't write class equals because class is a keyword in Python. So you have to write COS equals. So you'll see that we have the main has a class. Okay, so like that's the basic idea of constructing HTML in Python. You have to have it respond to this. And so FastHTML uses a pretty standard approach of having a decorator. So you start out by creating a FastHTML app. And then the decorator, this can be any HTTP verb. So get, we'll do a get. And this is what it's going to listen on. So this is, if you've used Flask, this is pretty standard. Or FastAPI. FastHTML is loosely based on or quite strongly based on FastAPI. I went through the FastAPI tutorial and tried to make each section of the tutorial work with the same syntax. So when you create your FastHTML app, you could, since we optionally make it, you don't have to manually create your HTML header. You have to have some way to say what headers are going to be there. So this is how you do that. And in this case, there's going to be, so FastHTML comes with a link ready to go for Pico CSS. This is, again, something you can give people. It's just these things predefined. And I added some additional stuff into a style sheet. So if you look in the FastHTML repo, you'll find examples. And yeah, I just changed some of the sizing a little bit. I found their defaults a bit too big for my liking. But you don't have to use any CSS if you don't want to. Okay, so how on earth does it go UL star to-dos? What's going on there? Well, to-dos, you hopefully won't be too surprised to learn, comes from FastLight. So I create a database using SQLite utils, and then I ask for the to-dos table. And you'll be pleased to see, Alexis, I used capital T for my to-dos data class. So as we've seen, if you type to-dos parentheses, it calls a select statement, and by default there'll be no limit and no where, and therefore this is all of your to-dos. They get passed as children to a UL. So how on earth does an unordered list render a data class? And the answer is that if your class contains a special dunder xt, these things are structures, I call them xt structures, standing for XML tags. If you have this special thing, this is what's used to render it in HTML, or actually as an xt. So I patch this into my to-do. There's lots of ways you could have done this, right? Like if you don't like this, you could instead simply have a function called xt. You could get rid of patch, and you could have just gone map like that, right? Like you could certainly do it that way as well. Either one's fine.
Very minor thing, Jeremy, but the to-dos table, if it doesn't exist, might, I think, cause issues. So
Yep,
I dumped some
exactly.
code
So
in the chat, but we can.
so there's a few ways you can handle this, right?
Mhm.
So in my case, in my case, I just have a little notebook where I've been fiddling around with things, and I created it there. And I added a few to-dos to it. So in fact, like you can see if I run these cells, I've got recreate equals true, so that's actually deleted and recreated it. So if I now go back to here, wait, is that using a different database? To-dos.tb. That's strange. Now why did refreshing, something was caching that? Interesting. Anyway, something to think about. Yeah, so if I change the, rerun the database, I get back the, different set of rows. So yeah, it's like Simon Willison's in his examples tends to kind of like have stuff in his like in his insert that like has additional things to describe how to create the table if it's not already there.
Mhm.
Kind of neat, but I kind of like I prefer to use something called migrations, which we probably won't talk about today, to do more stuff in SQL or outside of the main application to kind of get the initial structure in place. But yeah, or some people have like a if dunder name equals main at the bottom, and that way you can like run
Mm.
Python db app.py and it would create things. Yeah, you could have like something at the top that's like, oh, if it doesn't exist, then create it. So yeah, there's lots of ways you can do that. But it's a good point. Now each to-do has two links. And so here are those two links. Now, rather than using an A tag, I'm using an AX tag. That sometimes I add an extended version of a tag. Then when I extend a tag, I add an X to the end of it. And it's not very extended. It's just like, partly it's like some of the defaults are a bit different. So it starts out with like the text you want is first. And so I don't need any keywords here or whatever, but it's
So
basically
A
like,
doesn't mean anchor. A is a general purpose constructor for a tag like structure.
no, A means anchor. This is an anchor
Oh,
tag.
okay.
Yep, these are all, you see they're links, they're A links.
Okay.
Yep.
So AX is a anchor tag
An
that also has
extended
other
version
bits.
of an anchor tag or extended
Okay.
version of a hyperlink. Yeah.
Okay, so it's not like block or some kind of superclass that represents all block-like tags or anything. It's just
Nope.
anchor. Got it.
Otherwise it wouldn't know what tag to use. It didn't say. Yeah, so each to-do item is a list, you know, that contains that first link, and maybe it's done, and then that second link, and also it's got an ID, so it knows which to-do it is. So it's got this little tiny function here, which just returns to-do dash ID. So if I look at one of these list items, you can see here, li to-do one. Don't know where all this data default font size is coming from. Curious, probably some Pico thing or don't know. Okay. Yeah, so when I click delete, that sends a delete HTTP method to that endpoint. And I can just call todos.delete because that's how SQLite utils / FastLight works. So the next thing to talk about is how come we have what appears to be a SPA. You know, there's no full screen refreshes or anything, but it looks like I've written a kind of Web 1.0 style app here. And the trick to make this work is something called HTMX. And HTMX basically adds what I think of as the obvious missing features to your browser and HTML. And so it adds 4 features basically and once you've got HTMX, which is a JavaScript library that's auto-installed if you use FastHTML, your browser behaves as if the following things are true. Normally a browser, or kind of without JavaScript and stuff, a Web 1.0 browser could do 2 things. It could provide a hyperlink, which when clicked on sent a GET request, or it could have a form, which when submitted sends normally a POST request. There are lots of other HTTP methods. So HTMX lets you adds all of those other methods as things that a browser link, button, etc. can do. The second issue with Web 1.0 HTML was only 2 things could cause any action to happen. Clicking a hyperlink could cause a GET request to be called and the entire page replaced with a result, or it could cause a submit to be done with the form data. And again, the page to be replaced with the result. HTMX makes it so that any object can cause behavior. The third is that with Web 1.0, the result from the server can only do one thing, which is replace the whole page. HTMX makes it so that you can either replace the page or replace a single DOM element or delete a DOM element or insert after a DOM element or insert before a DOM element. So it lets you, change where the result from the server goes. Damn it, what's the fourth one? So we've got any
The
HTTP
triggers.
method, you've got what you change, you've got what can trigger it. I'm sure the fourth one will come up in a moment. So the way this works is that you add additional attributes. Let's right click on this and choose inspect, that have an hx at the start. So hx-get means this will cause a get method to be sent to this, which obviously is the same as what an a tag does anyway. It's the send a get method, but this is an htmx get method. Okay, so I mentioned that the result doesn't necessarily replace the entire page. How do you decide what it does do? Whatever target is what's replaced. So there's a thing called current to do, which is actually a empty div down here, right? So when we click on this, it'll call to do /1 and it'll insert the result into current to do. So we could see what's going to happen by manually going to /todos /1. And you can see there it is, right? There's that little snippet. So the HTML and head and bodies got added by my browser. But actually, I guess if we look at the notebook, the network tab, you can see actually this was the response. Right? So you get this little HTML partial, and it will be inserted into this div. So let's try it. If I click, pop, and you can now see, yep, there it is. It's been inserted into this div. That make sense?
Mhm.
So that's what HTMX is. And Alexis was talking earlier about like kind of hooking into the flexible foundations of the web rather than creating some single purpose abstraction. So HTMX basically endeavors to make that kind of web foundation dramatically more flexible and powerful by just taking what's already there and kind of doing it almost like in hindsight, the obvious thing, which is like just to remove
Mhm.
the constraints.
And maybe just to
Yep.
clarify something, like you don't have to use HTMX with FastHTML. These are two orthogonal things. Like I've built basically the same app, but anytime you want to do something, you can just get the full page, and the full page
Yeah,
is rebuilt now with an extra to-do item
yeah,
in the list.
yeah. I mean,
That's
maybe
also feasible.
either now or in the future, you could show us that if you've got the 1.0 Web 1.0 version of this. But yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
So, the things that FastHTML does to make HTMX more convenient is, for example, by default, it includes the JavaScript for HTMX in the header, and in the, in the autocomplete, all of the HX things are there for you. And like, it's just minor little
Mm.
things. But yes,
Yeah.
it's not, you certainly don't have to use HTMX. Um,
So, so here's a question about HTMX. You say that it allows you to make any element interactable. That makes sense.
mhm.
Thinking about native development, this is like in Cocoa Touch having a gesture recognizer. It's an object that you can attach to any UI element, and then will allow gesture recognition to be associated with it. Taps or swipes, other things. And then you say that it lets you choose, which kind of HTTP method is going to be executed. Okay,
Yes.
so that's good, because beyond get and post, there's things like patch and whatnot that enable partial updates that aren't as well known, but are have relevant
Yep. Or
semantics for
here
this
we've got,
problem.
so you can see them here. We've got delete to delete it to do, post to
Yeah,
create it to do, and put to update it to do.
right. But so my question is, uh, while those HTTP methods have a lot of relevant semantics, there's all sorts of actions one wants that aren't expressed by an HTTP method, that aren't just kind
Mhm.
of yeah. So in that case,
You would use paths. So for example,
okay,
show an edit form. There's a different path for that. So you can, yeah, have a, so like, and in fact, you could use only post, or you could use only get. Like there's no particular reason you have to use any other HTTP verb. You can only use paths for everything.
okay.
and some people do. So you could
All right,
have
so you,
/to-do/delete/id as a
okay.
get. I
So,
mean,
so
whatever.
So I can use HTMX to make an arbitrary element interactable, but then I have a choice about what the action means. It could mean in a simple way, hey, update this component that's in the DOM, or it could mean actually, hey, send a thing to my server, a GET request, and that thing is now going to trigger
Well, I mean,
some
it
kind of complicated.
always means send an HTTP request to the server. You choose what request method it is, and you choose what path it goes to, and you choose what data is in it, and you choose what headers are there. So it's the normal things you have to choose when you create any HTTP request. And then on the server, this is what you write. You then
Okay.
decide what happens. What happens when this path gets this HTTP method? Oh, it runs this function.
Okay, so it's single page and very dynamic because we don't see a whole page reload, but it's still doing a round trip to the server even
It
for
is, correct.
incremental local modifications in the page. Okay.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
okay.
So, for
Another,
example, one of the things you are likely to want at some point is something where, like, maybe it's a create new user, and as you start typing the username, a little thing pops up saying username is available. So that's an example. So you can absolutely attach, um, HX dash key up or whatever, or sorry, like you can attach I think it'd be HX dash trigger equals key up. So now we're attaching a to the, as you type, it's sending stuff to the server, and then the server sends back something saying, put user is available into the user available empty div or whatever. So,
okay.
and so it's surprisingly okay. Like that, at least even from Australia, we're at 70 milliseconds each way to the US, and most servers are in the US. It doesn't feel at all slow. Like you wouldn't write a computer game in this because every
Right.
time you click a key, it has to do a full round trip, you know. But anything that can happen in about 150 milliseconds is going to be fine.
Okay.
And for
So
stuff
I
you do want,
notice,
you can still write JavaScript, of course, if you did want stuff that happens in less than 150 milliseconds.
I noticed that the HTMX magic is managed through these HX attributes. And part of interoperating with the web is not just being able to use HTML and JS, but using the enormous suite of components that other people have, made. So I know that in terms of like heavyweight reusable components, like if I want a complicated, like let's say I want to have a location picker, which is going to present a kind of browsable, zoomable little view into a map and allow me to like put a
Yep,
pin and
no
then
problem.
show me the address and then confirm it.
Yep.
That's a very plausible thing I
HTMX is great
want.
for that. Yep.
Okay, because I don't want to
So,
make that myself, but I also
no,
don't want to have to like become a, full-time React JS
no,
type of
no,
person in order to be
absolutely.
able to use it in this thing. So
So
what's
look,
the
somebody
integration story?
else, somebody else, hopefully, somebody who's not me, or who likes Python more than I do, sorry, who likes JavaScript more than I do, hopefully will create the pip installable thing. So for example, there's a sortable JavaScript library,
Okay.
and here's an HTMX demo of using the sortable JavaScript library. You can see these things are being dragged around,
hmm
and I've got to try and get it between the two. And you can see underneath these are the requests that were coming in, right? So this is actually using HTMX that now, because sortables has been attached to HTMX, these are triggering HTMX HTTP events, right? And you can see the response coming back is again a little HTML partial. So the first person to make HTMX and sortables work together is going to have some write some JavaScript. And so here's
Right.
the JavaScript they wrote, right? But once somebody's written that once, they can stick that on PyPy, and now everybody can use it by just
Okay.
writing, sortable equals true or something in their form, whatever. Yep. And it's not a lot of,
Okay.
it's not like it's not it's not a lot of JavaScript, and B, the JavaScript's not complicated because HTMX is using very standard
Stuff.
JavaScript stuff. Yep.
So I don't know much about React, but I know that it tends to be integrated. It provides a reusable component model, which is why it's been successful. But I also know that component model is integrated with a certain data flow model. Do we know if
Yeah.
anyone has used
This is not
HTMX
for
to?
React,
Okay.
right? So this is for stuff more like
What about like web components or like
shoelace
something that's maybe
components, for
less
example. Yeah,
opinionated
web
or
components.
Vue?
So, and this
Okay.
is the way the web's going, right?
Well, let us hope.
Is
Yeah.
is these kinds of these components can go in React or Vue or Angular. Hopefully, at some point, somebody's going to add the fast HTML version in here,
hmm
you know, and
But React, I'm not familiar with that domain, but it seems like it's like the first generation of an idea that has been refined with some of these later kind of component models anyway. So
yeah,
maybe some of those component models are easier to HTMXify, and then the kind of promised land that you might get to is that they're pip installable components once you're there.
yeah. That's not some distant
Mm.
promised land. I mean, hopefully, within a few weeks, there'll be quite a few, you know. Um, and as I say, it comes with some already super basic stuff like group, you know,
Right.
and card. So yeah, great. So let's have a look behind the scenes a little bit, and then we can maybe come back to here to look at some of the details if that's of interest. Um, so the kind of basic thing, I guess, this is all built on is fastcore.xml. And originally it was just a list. XT was just a list. Now it derives from list and has three very handy properties: tag, children, and attributes, which are just in case you forget the order of what's 0, 1, and 2. That's all they are. And it also has an init that you can only pass in exactly three things, but it's just a list. And so that's what an XT object is. It's a list, and you can just use a list. There's no need to use an XT object. This is just meant for your convenience. So if you use the XT function, you pass in a tag, you pass in the children, and you pass in the keywords. And so XT, got my fancy tag, and then that contains a child and another child, and then it's attribute.
So why are you doing XT as a function rather than patching it in as a method onto the list type? Well, I guess because list isn't a type as such. Okay.
You know, I mean, now that I've added this, so originally I wrote this. Now that I've got this, I could have replaced it as having under init, could have done these tiny little things. So it's just history. Anyway, it's not much code, so it's fine.
Okay.
Um,
I'm just thinking about the analogy with the attribute, the anchor type, where you had anchor and then you used patch to retroactively conform to this de facto protocol of underscore underscore XT.
yeah, no, it's a bit different
But you're
because
not
it's
doing that
changing the
here with list.
constructor, and I don't want to change the constructor of all lists.
Okay. All right.
I very much doubt you even could because it's built in. Okay, so then I just grabbed all of the main HTML tags and added them all to the module. So now as a result, if you call HTML, head, title, body, div, p, input, image, instead of using CL, so instead of using class, you can use HTML class or class or class. These are all kind of standard things. Oh, actually, I've also seen some people use underscore class. Let's use that as well. Underscore class, which means we should also allow underscore 4. Okay, so there's various different ways you can spell it. So yeah, so as you can see, it's just returned a 1, 2, 3 element list. Or these are 3 element lists. So that's it. And it doesn't have to be like you can put text there as well. Maybe that would be better to demonstrate. So, okay.
Mhm.
So as I mentioned, they've got property names. What else is there to show you? Okay, so then the thing that converts that structure into XML/HTML is this. So you can see here, here it is. Okay, so that's the basic foundation. So there's hardly any code as usual. I don't like writing code. I don't like having to make people read lots of code. So then on top of that, there's FastHTML.core. Now, FastHTML.core is the thing which does this stuff. And this is basically a pretty thin wrapper around Starlet. Starlet is a ASGI, I think it's a ASCII framework. This ASCII thing is a standard way to create Python web applications. And basically almost nobody understands it or knows what it is. Because when I started asking around to try to learn about it, everybody was like, I don't know what it is. I just use other people's things, right? So now that I do know what it is, at some point, I'll do a little course in that. For now, I'm just going to say, don't worry about it too much. It's a thing which, like, Starlet provides that thing for you. And Starlet lets you, create routes that send you off to functions and have responses and have things in requests or whatever. It's I think it's not necessarily designed to be something that most people write things in directly. I suspect it's mainly designed for people to write stuff like FastHTML in, or indeed FastAPI, which is a super popular library, is written on top of Starlet as well. So FastAPI is designed to create APIs. So all of the so you go to the tutorial. Wait, how else do I use the tutorial? This is not good. Oh, I see. That's interesting. When you zoom in, it makes everything disappear. Yeah, so basically in the tutorial, it's a really good tutorial. And a lot of the things you learn here will also apply to FastHTML. It always returns JSON, or returns dictionaries, which become JSON. So at the end of this tutorial, you don't actually end up with an application at all. You end up with an API that you could write an application on top of, and that's going to require JavaScript. So FastHTML is designed to be something where the thing that gets returned here are HTMX, partials or HTMX pages. So that's basically what this is. So, here's a list of all of the HTMX headers, for example. So we haven't even talked about this, but when HTMX calls your HTTP verb endpoint, it always includes, for example, an hx-request header. So you can always tell if something is sent by HTMX or not. What I might do is jump to the tests, just to give you a sense of what FastHTML.core does. So FastHTML is something that I can create an app. And then this is quite neat. Starlet has a thing called test client, which I can now call CLI.get on, for example. So that may be the first one. We should do this manually. CLI.get. It handles any HTTP verb, can go here. And I can say, okay, what URL? And you can also pass in headers, cookies, etc. So we're going to go to /hi because we've just defined a listener there. And you can see that's returned a response, which has various things in it, including text. Okay,
And
so
it's somewhat helpful here to know a little bit about like the starlet requests and responses and things like that. But maybe that's like a good separate cutting point for like,
I mean,
yeah,
you
like a
kind
different
of
video
hopefully
course or something like
don't,
that.
right? Because like here, I just returned
Mm,
text.
right.
So I'm kind of trying to make it so you don't have to know about any of those things, but you can use them if you want to. But in fact, in our tests, none of them use a request or a response, except for the very first one,
Okay.
just to prove to you that you
Yeah.
can.
Right.
Um,
So
yeah,
if I didn't know the fast HTML way to do things, but I did know, well, if you give me a starlet request, I know what I'm doing with that, then that's great for the people who have that. But if you don't have
yeah.
that, then you don't need to
But
worry
if you
about
do
it.
have,
And you
if
can
you're
just
fine with that, just use Starlet in a sense,
mm.
maybe, you know. So
Right.
yeah, so basically, um, so I mean, one thing you do need to know from Starlet and from Flask and from just about everything is that the thing we say, oh, this is the endpoint I want you to listen on. You can whack a thing in curly brackets, and that means anything that gets put in there will work. Um, yeah, maybe the first few we should do manually. So yeah, as you say, Starlet has this concept of requests. And if you add a parameter to your function, to your route function, that's called request or rec or R or any subset of request, it will automatically be passed this special request object. Oh, you know what? It would be better to look at index because that actually shows you, I think. Yeah, here we go. So this one here, well, there's a lot of stuff in request. I mean, we could just print it out. So let's actually, no, it probably won't work. Never mind. So yeah, the request object is something that you could go to starlets and go to requests. And you can see here request, and there's various things in a request object. The idea is, though, with FastHTML is that you never have to worry about any of that. But it is there if you want it. So one of the things in there is a dictionary of headers. So the test client uses this as their header.
So authentication's often a domain where one starts to care about HTTP headers because cookies and things like that are managed through headers.
Well, you're not going to
I'm
have to
curious
worry
if
about that either. It's all going to be automatic. But let me get there so you
okay.
can see. We won't do authentication today, but we will do cookies. Okay, so if there's a curly bracket thing here, that's going to get passed to your function if your function has a parameter with the same name. And give it a type, right? So it can there you go. Okay. So this is a bit of magic, although it's pretty standard magic for these kinds of libraries, is to work this way. And it will endeavor to cast things appropriately. So in this case, obviously there's no such thing as ints or whatever in paths, but we've asked it to become an int and it will turn it into one. Like so. Okay, which actually that's exactly what this one already does, so it's not very interesting. If you return an XT, it will be automatically 2XML'd. So when we call /HTML/1, we get back all this HTML, because that's what this gets. You can, this is quite a nice, neat little thing. You can register regular expression parameter types. So here I'm registered something called image extensions as a regex. And then if you stick it in here, it will match anything that matches this regular expression. The type can be other more interesting things. In this case, model name is an enum. So /model/AlexNet returns AlexNet.
Oh, you overwrote /name.
I broke it.
Hmm.
That's what I did. Come back to that. So if I look for /models/GPT5, sorry, yes, yes, /models/GPT5, then I'll get back a value error. GPT-5 is not a valid model name, at least not at the point we're recording this video. Okay, so you can also put stuff as query parameters. Right, so that, and again, it just comes through exactly the same way. You can also add stuff as headers. Dash, they'll be lowercase and dashes turned into underscores. If there are HTMX special headers, and you have a HTMX headers type, they will be passed to there. Or you can just use the special name HTMX.
So in those examples is what we would see if we hit those endpoints, that those values are echoed back. Like it would read the user agent from the request and then return that back in the response.
Yeah, it's just, so it's returning a string.
Right.
Right, so the string is the number one. Yep, so it just returns the number one. You can see here, this is the expected value. So it's returning the number one as a string.
Okay.
Just like up here, we returned the string hi there. This time we're returning the
Yeah,
string
no,
one.
I understand the return mechanism, but what I'm
Okay.
looking at is the parameters in the are the, let me see the def of UA. Right. Okay, so UA, user agent, user agent's a special keyword that means I'm going to take my input parameter from the HTTP header. Is that right?
No, no, no.
Oh, okay.
Nothing special at all.
Okay.
There's only two
I
special
thought
ones, which
okay,
is
I thought that might be
HTMX and request.
mhm.
Everything else
Okay.
is not special.
Okay.
Everything else looks in order to see if it's a path parameter. If not, is it a query string? If not, is it a header? So it just keeps
Okay.
looking to try and, it does everything it can to find something. And so it found a header called user agent.
Okay.
Yep.
Got it.
And if not, is it a cookie? So here we set a cookie And so this is where we do, for now at least, require have to create a starlet response object, and we set the cookie. And so here, that cookie was called now. So here, if we put now, it will grab the cookie because it's not a header and it's not a query string and it's not a path object. So it gets the cookie. Also, you can pass things into a post request. So in this case, the data we're going to pass in is this dictionary. And so if it's, this is quite fun, I think. If you have data in a post request and you have a data class, it will automatically put it into that data class. So here data is now a Bodhi object because you asked it to be. And if we try to put in something that you can't fill into a Bodhi object, then you will of course get an exception. It's like, oh, you can't put a C in there. Okay. You don't have to use a data class. You can also use a dictionary. Now, if you use a dictionary, right, then it won't be A and the number one anymore. It'll be A and the string one because it has no idea what data type you want it to be. Right. So this is a good reason that data classes work nicely with FastHTML, and that's why I added FastLight's data class support.
And you could do
mhm.
like if you wanted to be real fancy, you could do Pydantic and then have custom validation on that. Oh, it has to be a string, and also it needs to be a string that starts with these
Yep,
letters and
you can do all that.
rhymes with this. Yeah.
I don't love it myself. I would rather
Mm,
do that in the function, the handler.
right.
To me, that's a better place for that. Unless, like, yeah, I don't see the point of using pedantic for that because you can put it in
Mhm.
the function and then you can respond to those validation issues in a more nuanced handler specific way. But yeah, you
Yeah.
could. You can also create a named tuple, so that works fine. Again, named tuples are untyped, so it won't know what that is. Or you can just create any old class. And as long as it has annotations, it will know what types things have to be. So Bodhi2 is a number
Hmm.
because it's looked inside here and been like, oh, if it's a number or none, so we'll try and make it a number. Yeah, so it tries, like, basically FastHTML does everything it can to give you the parameters that you've requested, is basically the way to think of it.
So here are two things that occur to me. Well, three. One is I'm having all these flashbacks from the last time I built a significant web app endpoint. Like so many of the design patterns are similar. I'm not sure if this is how everyone builds endpoints or it's just a
Yeah, it's an attempt to
coincidence.
be like, no, it's an attempt to be like as normal as possible.
Okay, well that
So
explains
yeah,
it. I guess
if
I
we
wasn't
go
doing
to
it in a weird
the
way.
Fast API tutorial, right? I literally went through every line of code, copied and pasted it, and tried to make it work exactly the same way, except the return is not JavaScript anymore. So
Right.
yeah, if you're a Fast API user, it should be extremely normal.
So the second thing that occurs to me is that the behavior of um, search with fall through when you get a key, essentially.
Mm,
Is the key something that was given to me in the path?
mm.
No. Okay. Well, is it something that's there in a query parameter? No. Okay. Is it in the
And
header?
here it is, by the
Is it
way.
in
And
the
when I
cookie?
sent
Mm.
this
Yeah.
code to Jono, he was happy. He was like, oh, okay, it's nice to see.
Well, and I had to see that, right? Before I saw that, I didn't trust it. And what I was writing was
Fair
just
enough.
always give me the request, thank you very much, and I'll check if in
Right.
requests.cookies or request.useragent or whatever, like I'll
Yes.
go get the thing myself. Because I didn't know what magic you were doing. And
Yeah.
so it's like, okay, fine. I can
It,
see it now. It's like, okay, now I'm happy to
it's
trust.
slightly magic, and I'm not saying that's bad.
Mm.
I can
No.
see it's dead handy. It also triggers my magic spidey sense.
Yeah.
The one possible failure mode I could imagine here is if someone naively chose as their name for a parameter, a query parameter,
Mm.
a key that's already,
Yep.
conventionally used as a header name or a cookie name
Well,
or
that would
something
be
like that.
okay because headers go last. So the order of
Mm.
these was carefully chosen.
Right.
But if you have a query param and a path param that are the same, or if you have a query param the same as a
Yeah.
cookie, you won't get your cookie anymore. Yeah.
Mm.
Well, also fortunately, the header field namespace is not, polluted with like 8 million things that are out of our control. It's a
Yeah.
relatively
No, that's fine.
orderly
They're
part of
last
the
anyway,
universe.
so it's not a
Yeah.
Yeah.
problem.
The last observation I have, and this may be just that I'm not used to doing a ton of web development, is when I look at how the code looks and how the logic of it looks, there's these two namespaces that are side by side because we're trying to understand their interaction, but they're still different. And that's the namespace of the URL path. We have to choose the string that represents the path, uh, and then separate from that is the namespace of the function names and the kind of parameters within the
Mm.
functions. So one is
Yeah, it's weird. Like
necessarily,
the name of the function, like you could call them all underscore, I think.
yeah,
And it bothers me a little bit that there's just like, yeah. So
Mm.
the reason I haven't done anything about that is because this is how Fast API and Flask and everything works.
yeah.
But
When we're building the web from scratch, one wouldn't want to have, you know, this weird world where you have the path, you have this like effectively a mini language, which is what's expressed in the URL
yes,
path,
yes, that's a
and then
little
another
spooky DSL.
language which expresses like the action that's actually performed,
Yeah.
the symbol that represents the action that's performed in
Mm.
the server program. And then you have, a whole mapping thing in between, and you have to like, well, is this the right name? Am I changing the underlines? Is this exposing too much? Is this exposing too little? It all feels a bit, jury-rigged together, but I guess that's the web for you.
I quite like it. It's especially because you can have multiple methods, right? So you can have like the get on slash is generate homepage might be, or or home might be my function, right? Because it's going to respond back with a full web page full of all the content that I want.
Yeah.
But the post on that might just be like you're submitting the form to like sign up for my email newsletter. And so then I can have a separate function that's
So
listening
here we
for
go.
the post
I,
option.
I just
Yeah.
renamed everything to underscore and it still works.
Nice.
Like maybe that's not a bad thing because like, yeah,
Mm.
why are you spending times naming this function that never gets used?
How would you call it with testing then? If you can't use the function name anymore, right?
That's fine. I'm client.get. Like,
Okay.
Mm.
so in fact,
Yeah.
I do have this, all of my tests work that way.
I kind of like that, but I don't spend a lot of time doing web development, so I don't know if my tastes are informed by my deep judgment and experience or informed by my vast ignorance of the domain. I guess a little of each. I'm not sure which of those one
Yeah.
should listen to.
Anyway, okay,
Um,
I gotta go. But
this was
so we
very
haven't quite
cool. This was
finished.
very
Yeah,
cool. Yeah.
Thanks you very much. I had a feeling that was going to take a while. We've got a lot more. Well, not a lot more, but a bit more. But anyway,
bit more.
that's
But this is something
uh
that we'll be showing people a lot more from, I suspect. Different ways to write the same apps, different
yeah,
extensions of it, how to make it play nicely with the database stuff that you showed, which we didn't really get a chance to go into, like
yeah,
why those data classes play so nicely with it.
yeah.
Yeah, so
All right,
stay tuned
gang.
for parts two.
All right.
Cheers
See
all.
you.
See ya.
Bye.